name is Marcel Haddix, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Ed, and I'm the chair of the Landscape of Urban Education Lecture Series. I am thrilled to see this room so packed for our speaker today, Jan Poppendieck, who is going to be speaking about stepping up to the plate, fixing school food in America. And I'm going to allow Dr. Sarah Gitlin to introduce her in a few minutes, but I wanted to make sure that you all are aware that there is another series of workshop lecture that is coming up. You should have a flyer that gives you that information on Monday, October 14th. We are excited to have Lee Patel come, who is the author of Youth Held at the Border. So please mark your calendars. I hope to see you. Sarah, so I want to introduce Sarah Gitlin, who is instrumental in bringing Jan here this afternoon. So we're very excited, and she'll tell you a little bit about our speaker.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Oop. I feel like the flyer you got said so much about our speaker, so I've really tried to figure out something else to say. Dr. Janet Poppendieck writes about food, school food, food policy, food insecurity, the social history of food assistance during the Depression. But her work raises larger questions about social justice in American society. The questions she asks in her research reflect her skills and thoughtfulness as a researcher, partly because she manages to portray in her work the complications of everyday life for people and the multiple pulls on them as they try to make decisions without letting go of the social justice lens that frames her work. One tension she explores is the disconnect between intent and effect. For example, she wondered in Sweet Charity, her book about emergency food and the end of entitlement in the 90s, how the kindness that people show each other and want to demonstrate in the creation of community food banks and emergency food distribution programs results in a system that has absolutely the opposite effects. It keeps people poor and separates the problem of food insecurity from the government's failure to address a stable infrastructure necessary to ensure that people won't starve. She is an important critic of the charity model. A researcher and an activist who has interrupted her scholarly career at different times to work on food-related activism and policy, she has also won an award from the side of the James Beard Foundation that pays attention to social leadership and humanitarian concerns. But it must have been really cool to be in with all of the food stars. Her orientation towards her work makes her, in my mind, a great role model for scholarship and action, our Chancellor's signature program for connecting the university to social action in the community. She also appears in the current film, A Place at the Table, starring, among others, Jeff Bridges. I was introduced to Dr. Poppendieck's work when I assigned Free for All, Fixing School Food in America to my Advanced Qualitative Research Methods course. I think this book is a model for a deep, rich, and expansive study that approaches its topic using a wide variety of qualitative methods. The book's lively beginning follows Jan as she works as a lunch lady in a high school, where readers learn the differences between free lunch, reduced price lunch, and full price lunch. It might look like these labels simply say who will pay more, less, or nothing for their meals, but that would not be accurate. Schools make money from full price lunches, and to get kids to buy these lunches as the quality of school food declined, they serve food that many kids like, but that's terrible for us. Pizza, tater tots, fried everything, and more. But the students see this as cool food, and there are certain privileges that go along with getting cool food, like perhaps being able to have access in California to eating outdoors in the patio. And Dr. Poppendieck reports that many kids who qualify for free or reduced price lunch will not eat those lunches so that they don't appear poor or uncool. There is a stigma attached to school food the way we've served it. So while not losing sight of class issues in relation to school lunches, Jan shows how the system is bad for all kids, a tactic or an approach in research that is important for an inclusive approach. A better system is good for all students, not just those who count on school food for their meal of the day. There are lots more issues that this important book takes up, including how corn syrup got into everything, why school lunches are regulated by the Department of Agriculture rather than the Department of Health and Human Services or the Department of Education, and how memories of school lunch live on in the minds of college students. But I want to make one more point before I turn the floor over to our speaker. In spite of the devastating critique of the impact of school food policies on students and her great descriptions of the junk that many students eat in school, for example, did you know that tater tots, nuggets, and rolls count as for 3 food groups? What she calls the golden plate, since everything has this golden hue. The author also provides hope that change is not only possible, but is currently occurring as school districts in some rural and urban communities attack the problem, bringing students closer to the production of vegetables in gardens as one example of how you create change. But there's another example that Jan describes that made me wish it could be true. In 1967, Marion Wright Edelman, then Marion Wright, who was a civil rights attorney at the time, took a few senators who were visiting Mississippi as part of a Senate subcommittee conducting hearings on the war on poverty on a driving tour of the rural outback of the Delta, the Mississippi Delta. They witnessed what Poppendieck calls poverty and hunger in their most desperate forms. One of the senators, George Murphy, was a conservative Republican whose eyes were opened by the experience. He said, and I'm quoting from the book, "I didn't know we were going to be dealing with a situation of starving people and starving youngsters." This experience affected his perspective. Does witnessing human suffering firsthand mean that change is possible? There's a lot of debate about this on campuses now. I'm always hopeful that providing a context for this kind of witnessing does make a difference. Would such witnessing have influenced the current conservative Republican representatives who voted last week to slash $40 billion from the food stamp program, a program that directly affects children in hunger? Certainly, conservative Republicans who were imprisoned over their participation in Watergate during the Nixon administration changed their views and came to see the inhumanity of our prison system. This is surely a critical moment to hear Dr. Janet Poppendieck speak about her important work.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank Marcel Haddix and Jennifer Russo for making the arrangements, and Sari Bicklin for initiating this, and the lecture series for inviting me, and all of you for coming. I have wanted to speak to an ed school since I started working on this issue. My father was a professor of education. Okay, he taught in the ed school at Rutgers, and then he went on to become a federal bureaucrat in teacher education. So I've been trying to get into an ed school for a long time because, and I guess I'm skipping right to the heart of my lecture, and then I'll get back to the beginning. But teachers and school administrators are the key to changing school food. And as I said, I'll now go back to the beginning. When I was first working on this book, I had the great good fortune to have a sabbatical. And I normally have been teaching, almost 4 decades in the heart of New York City. Hunter College is at 68th Street and Lexington Avenue, and we have 2 trees. And I'm having a little bit of facilities envy and grass envy as I look at your very beautiful campus on what I understand is an extraordinarily beautiful day. Not the normal Syracuse weather, but it's my total experience of it. But in any case, I had the good fortune to take a sabbatical at the University of California at Santa Cruz, which is about as different from Hunter in terms of the campus as you can get. There was literally a mountain lion alert posted beside the door to my office because the mountain lions would come back down from the back country to feast on the deer that wandered around in herds on the campus, which is on a bluff overlooking Monterey Bay. Good place for graduate. So if you drive north from Santa Cruz, California, up the Pacific Coast Highway, you will very shortly come to a little sign that says, Davenport, elevation 80, population 200. And I want to start my talk by telling you about school lunch in Davenport. In Davenport, the 5th graders prepare the school lunch. It's a course that they take called Food Lab, and under the direction of a truly wonderful school food service director who is also the owner of a cafe next door, they plan a menu. They're divided into 5 teams, one team, 4 kids for every day of the week. They plan a menu that they have to make comply with the federal regulations, and then on the morning of the day, they help to order the food, but on the morning of the day that they're cooking, someone comes in from the office with the count for the day, and they do the arithmetic to see how many servings and how much ingredients they need. They adapt the recipes to the size group they're going to have, and then they cook it. The day that I was there, they made a New England clam chowder. Well, here, I'm going to read you just a little bit from Free for All. The day that I visited, the menu was New England clam chowder, salad, rolls, and oatmeal cookies. The process began when a student arrived with the day's lunch count from the principal's office. The crew of 5th graders took the recipe for chowder, noted the number of servings that it would afford, and carried out a bit of arithmetic to see how many multiples of the recipe they would need. They were old hands at salad and already knew how much to prepare, but the oatmeal cookies also needed the math factor. They worked with remarkable speed and cheer in the small kitchen, cutting up potatoes and onions, tearing lettuce, scraping carrots, slicing radishes, some of which came from the school garden, and measuring and mixing the cookie ingredients. It was spring when I visited, and they had been at this since September, so they were at ease, but the pace was brisk. About 20 minutes before lunch was scheduled, a team of 4th graders descended on the school's lunchroom, housed in a sunny enclosed porch, to set the tables, checkered tablecloths, real knives and forks, not plastic, real plates, not paper, and a small bouquet of flowers, again from the school garden. When the rest of the children arrived, most teachers ate with students, and all the tables had at least one adult. While they ate, the multi-talented Mrs. Rogost, who was the food service supervisor, played a recording of one of the concertos from Vivaldi's Four Seasons on the sound system and explained a bit about the composer and the instruments played in the piece. A daily dose of music education enables the school to pay Ms. Ragost as a certified music educator, partly from instructional funds. So because the number of schools, there are only 100 children in the whole school, okay? This would not generate enough income for a full-time school food service manager. And so the school found a way around it with that creativity. Given the amount of math she oversaw and the running commentary she provided during the preparation phase, music educator does not capture her academic contribution. Okay, now. John Dewey, in whose University of Chicago laboratory school the children cooked and served lunch at least once a week, would have loved it. And the theory underlying Food Lab, as the course is called, and Life Lab, the garden-based curriculum developed at the University of California's Santa Cruz and in use in gardens throughout California, is very compatible with the ideas of the founder of pragmatism. Dewey understood that learning was facilitated when children were engaged in real tasks with real consequences. In School and Society, which has never been out of print since its first publication in 1899. What a thing to be able to claim. He wrote of, quote, the difference that appears when occupations are made the articulating centers of school life, a difference in motive, of spirit, of atmosphere. As one enters a busy kitchen in which a group of children are actively engaged in the preparation of food, the psychological difference, the change from more or less passive and inert recipiency and restraint to one of buoyant, outgoing energy is so obvious as to fairly strike one in the face. Well, amen. When I have had an opportunity to see groups of children cooking in schools, I have experienced that level of energy and engagement to which he refers. And then goes on to say that Dewey did not have them cook only because it engaged their energies, but also because he used it as a basis for teaching biology, geography, math, and various components of the standard curriculum. So I want to talk a little bit about curriculum and the relationship between curriculum and the really now nearly nationwide movement to improve the quality of school food in the cafeteria. Sari mentioned some of the monochromatic meals that I reported from my research, and they really were distressing. There was a lot of very poor food, and there were federal regulations that were very well intended but that backfired, as regulations sometimes do, producing perverse consequences. So I did, in fact, see a lot of very unhealthy, and I'm not a nutritionist, but I am a sentient human being, and I have read some basics of healthy eating, and I can tell you that there were many meals that would not have met with any of our approval. But I also want to tell you that my timing was great this time. And the book came out just as there really was a rising movement to improve the quality of school food, largely in reaction to the obesity epidemic, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, or the concern about obesity. But curriculum comes in because what children experience at school is part of the curriculum. As an advocate in California put it to me, if a kid has a package of Tostitos and a iced tea for lunch in school, that's her nutrition education for the day. That's what she learns. That's what she remembers and associates with school. So I am overtly trying to enlist you in two aspects of this revolution. Seems a little strong word. I like to save that word for really momentous and probably rapid changes, but for this transformation of school food that is indeed in progress. I want to enlist you on the cafeteria side, and we'll talk about that a little later, but I also want to enlist you in the curriculum side, because kids love food. Well, almost all of us love food, and it can be such a powerful medium for teaching the basics that you are charged or will be charged with teaching. In Vermont, there's an organization called Vermont Feed, that stands for Food Education Every Day, which sponsors summer workshops in which teachers develop curriculum incorporating food for a variety of subjects and grade levels. So a third grade teacher comes and develops a math and counting curriculum, that module that uses food, or a sixth grade language art teacher comes and develops a writing module based on observations in school gardens. Of course, these in Vermont reflect the Vermont state standard. The Center for Eco-Literacy in California has developed fabulous curricular resources. Here in New York, Antonia DeMoss has done some wonderful work with curriculum that would encompass the state standards. But I want to kind of invite you to the adventure of thinking about the uses of food in your curriculum. There are barriers to the kinds of programs like the one I mentioned in Davenport that have to do with mundane things like the school schedule. I visited a program called Cooking with Kids in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And in Santa Fe, a group of chefs in the community and concerned parents and interested foodies got together to create this project to provide food education in the schools, and to do it by cooking with children, hence Cooking with Kids. And they developed lessons and workshops. The day I was there, we were making a stovetop pizza in a frying pan, and it was a pizza margarita, and the food educators started with a little geography map identifying Italy on the map of the world and talking about peninsulas. And in the workbooks that students had that went along with this, peninsula was a vocabulary word, and students were helped to identify other peninsulas. When you're in Santa Fe, New Mexico, it's a ways to any peninsula, so it's not, a routine part of life. And then they learned a little bit about the period in Italian history when pizza margherita was invented as a tribute to the Princess Margherita. And they learned that those are the colors of the Italian flag. These were third graders. And the teacher brought in a sample of the Italian flag and showed the basil, the mozzarella, and the tomato, and held up the flag, and one of the little boys in the class said, "Oh, it's just like the Mexican flag without the bird." I really love the capacity of this kind of work to engage children. But in order to do this cooking lesson, and they made a salad dressing, they made the pizza, they cut the things up for the toppings, and then the pizzas had to be cooked enough for everyone in the class. They needed a 2-hour time block. It is not easy to schedule a 2-hour time block. Once every 4 weeks was about the schedule in the Cooking with Kids. It has to be a commitment. It has to be something that the school cares about, that the teachers care about, and that the administrators care about. It's a fabulous program. I encourage you to look it up on the web if you want to see more about it. I have this fantasy that some of you who are students in either undergraduate or graduate phase might be interested in collecting some of these curricula that have been developed, and I certainly would encourage you to get hold of the one from Cooking with Kids. But in this process of harnessing that energy and excitement that Dewey talked about, and engaging kids in teaching and in cooking, and using food and cooking as a medium to teach about the world we live in, the crucial barrier, or the crucial component for harnessing this for school food reform was to engage the school cafeteria. So for every Cooking with Kids lesson, the children will encounter the same food in the cafeteria the next day. So whenever a Cooking with Kids teacher comes in to give food lessons in the schools, the next day that item will be served in the cafeteria. That's very much similar to the approach of Cook Shop, which was invented in New York City, which is essentially a vegetable of the month approach, where volunteers come into classrooms with a cooking facility in a tub. Everything you need to cook is in a portable unit that can be brought into the classroom. Kids explore the vegetable, they learn about the vegetable. Sometimes they have a visit from the farmer who grew the vegetable. They cut the vegetable up, they taste the vegetable raw, and then they cook it. And then they taste it again. And the next day, or that same day, they have that vegetable in the cafeteria. Integrating with the cafeteria so that it becomes part of the educational process is at the core of tapping the potential of school food to contribute to, instead of undermine, nutrition and health education in our schools. So I want to talk for a minute, since I'm trying to recruit you, about why I think this is so important. And then I want to talk a little bit about what I think you could do in not just you as potential teachers and current teachers, but administrators and ed schools. And then I want to talk about what citizens need to be doing about school food in America. Okay, so let's go to why it's urgent. I guess you could say the twin threats of diet-related disease and food insecurity. Almost 50 million people in the United States, including almost 16 million children, live in households that are officially designated as food insecure. That means that they don't have enough food resources to meet their food needs throughout the month. They are constrained due to poverty. Children were food insecure in about 10% of households with children. You may say, wait a minute, didn't she just say 16? The assumption is that in many food insecure households, children are protected. And I'm sure if you've worked at all in low-income communities, you know parents who went without so that their kids could have enough. But even with that protective activity, children themselves were food insecure in 10% of American households. That's way too, American households with children. It's way too high. And it's about to get worse, because on the 1st of November, which I think in some faiths we call All Saints' Day, 47 million Americans will lose a portion of their SNAP benefits. SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is our nation's biggest and most primary defense against hunger, even more than the National School Lunch Program, although I'll talk about that in a moment. And early in the Great Recession, Congress passed a stimulus package called the American Relief and, wait a minute, was it Relief? Anyway, Recovery Act, the ARRA, you've probably heard of it. And one of the things the stimulus package did was to raise the SNAP benefit. It was actually Mark Zandi from Moody's Money surveyed a variety of stimulus options and reported that the single most efficient way to stimulate the economy would be to raise the SNAP benefit, because that's money that all gets spent. It all circulates immediately, and the economists tell us that for every dollar's worth of SNAP benefits that are dispensed, we get about $1.73 of economic activity. So it generates jobs, it generates transportation activity. It's good for all of us, and not just for the people who are receiving them. When they put aside money to pay this raised bonus, this SNAP increment, if you will, or SNAP increase, they recognized that having it end would be a hardship for many families. If you're getting by on a very small budget and suddenly somebody takes a piece of it away, that's very hard to adapt to. So they planned the ARRA SNAP bonus increase so that it would gradually be overtaken by inflation. The SNAP benefit level is based on a thing called the Thrifty Food Plan, and typically the cost of the Thrifty Food Plan goes up every year, and it had gone up a lot the year before the bonus was planned. And so they set aside money to allow this raised level of SNAP assistance to persist until it was essentially wiped out by inflation, so that although there would be an attrition in the value, no one would be facing a sharp drop in the value of their SNAP benefit or coupons. But later in that Congress, they decided they needed that money more for other purposes. Now, these happen to be very good purposes, okay? This was the money that was sent to the states to help teachers remain employed. You may have noticed that one. And it was money that was used to permit states not to have to cut people off of their Medicaid programs. So it was put to very important uses, but at the time that Congress took it for that, they said, well, we'll find other money to keep the SNAP. Well, they haven't found the other money. In fact, they took a little more from the SNAP reserve in order to pay for the 6 cents a meal increase in the school lunch reimbursement that they came up with as a reward for districts that would hasten to comply with new regulations. So at the very end, well, Halloween, we can live it up, because November 1st, 47 million people in this country are going to see a drop in their SNAP benefits. For a family of 3, it's about $29 a month. So it's, on the one hand, not enough to wipe people out completely, and on another hand, absolutely big enough to be felt. Okay, this is something. So, just to say that food insecurity, hunger is urgent, and school food is a powerful and important means of addressing hunger in the United States. About 2/3 of the lunches that are served in the National School Lunch Program are served at the free or the reduced price rate. Sari mentioned those. They're very badly mislabeled. First off, the full-price meals aren't full price. They receive a subsidy. Now with the 6 cents, if you're qualifying for the 6 cents, it's about 35 cents a meal, and another 20 cents worth of federal commodities. So there's actually a subsidy around the vicinity of 50 cents. Meals typically run $2.50 or $3, the so-called full price. So students are getting a substantial boost. If your income is at 180% of the poverty line, down to 130%, you qualify for a reduced price meal. In most of the country, that's a 40-cent lunch, but in New York, it's a 25-cent lunch because of an arrangement the legislature made some years ago. And if your income is below 130% of the poverty, then you're entitled to a free meal. And that is a tremendously important source of food for millions of low-income children in our nation. We have always known, or we have known for a long, long time, that hungry children cannot learn. The creation of school feeding in the United States, of the first school food programs, which were not federal at all, but which were undertaken by municipalities, mostly urban landscape, was intimately tied to the imposition of compulsory school attendance. Okay, what happened as states began to impose compulsory school attendance laws is that children from very, very poor families, where the children had been helping to earn the family's meager income, they had been doing that piecework in the garment industry lofts in the Lower East Side. They had been working in those mines in rural Kentucky. Those children were now required to come to school, so the families lost the little bit of income that the children had. And very typically, the children came to school without anything for lunch. They may have had something at breakfast. Children typically in urban schools walked home for lunch at that era, but in these very poor families, often the mothers were working as well as the fathers. And this was the point at which educators began to notice, and I'll quote here Robert Hunter, who wrote a book entitled Poverty in 1904, "It is utter folly from the point of view of learning to have a compulsory school law which compels children in that weak physical and mental state which results from poverty to drag themselves to school and to sit at their desks day in and day out for several years, learning little or nothing." How many of you have already spent time teaching in classrooms? You've had student teaching, or you're already teachers. Surely there must be more who've been out in classrooms. Okay, well, it's coming later. So those of you who may have observed a child who is irritable, and when queried turns out not to have had breakfast, we sometimes call those kids hangry. They're hungry and they're angry. At the same time, you may have seen children who are lethargic or withdrawn. That's another common consequence of not getting a meal before you start the school day. They become inattentive. They develop health problems. They miss school. Hunger is the enemy of education. Okay? So one reason why we need to make our school food programs as robust, as healthy, as welcoming, as inclusive as possible is because we have kids who without them will not get an adequate diet. But the other side of the current agenda around school food is clearly the diet-related disease side of the balance sheet here. Just the other day, I saw a summary saying that on average now we consume 78 pounds of sweeteners, sugar-based sweeteners each during a year. That's down from 89 pounds in 1999. We are making progress, and there's progress actually on a lot of the indicators of American diet. I think we're so used to hearing the bad news that we sometimes don't hear the modest good news. But while we've gone down from 89 pounds of sugars to 78, we've gone up from 8 pounds of cheese to 23. And cheese, as you know, is a notorious source of fats, often including the less healthy kinds of fats. In general, we eat too few vegetables and fruits and too little fiber, and too much of our flour is white flour and not enough whole grains. The government keeps an eye on all of this, and they recently measured the dietary quality for children 2 to 18 using the Healthy Eating Index based on the 2010 dietary guidelines. And with the Healthy Eating Index, there's a score depending on how what you're eating compares with the recommendations, with what you ought to eat. And if you met all the recommendations, your score would be 100. So that makes it easy. Basically, compare this with 100. Our National Healthy Eating Index for children 2 to 18 in 2010 was 49.8. So we didn't even get halfway to good. On the other hand, it's an improvement from 2003, 2004 when it was 46.9. So 47, we've gone up 3 points. It'll take a while at this at this rate. Think about what we might accomplish in the 12 years a child is typically in grades 1 through 12. The consequences of diet-related disease, it's not just obesity itself. It's the rise in type 2 diabetes, but it doesn't stop there. We're now seeing high blood pressure and high cholesterol in kids, which are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. We're seeing aggravation of joint problems, osteoarthritis in little children, and several types of diet-related cancer. So the diet-related disease side of this national challenge is urgent. School food has the potential to address these issues, and school food is definitely getting better. But school food has the potential also to help us address some of the other issues in our society. I want to take a little survey here. I want to ask you if in the last, let's say, 4 years, you have consciously and intentionally changed your diet in any way. Okay, so I want you to raise your hand if you are consciously and intentionally eating less meat or no meat. Anybody here trying to eat less meat? Okay, quite a substantial portion. How about eating more seafood? Anybody trying to eat more fish? Trying to confine that to wild fish. Anyone looking for wild? Okay. How about paying attention to hormones and antibiotics in your meat? Looking for, okay, what school food service directors call clean label meats. Anybody looking for free range or cage-free eggs and meat? Concerned about animal welfare as well as your own health? How about humanely raised and slaughtered meats? Okay. How many people have been trying to buy local? Good. Okay. Giving a preference to organic or minimally processed foods, trying to keep some of those pesticides not only out of your own body but out of the environment. How many people have been shopping at farmers markets or farm stands when they can? Good. Food co-op? Anybody shop in a food co-op? Okay. Anybody involved in the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture? It's a very good group, I must say. Okay. Anybody trying to make sure that, or at least direct your business toward businesses that pay a living wage? And then, okay, social justice. Anybody composting? All right, I was just fascinated to learn that 27% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from landfills, and it's overwhelmingly from organic material that could be composted. We have a composting demonstration project finally going on in the public schools of New York City these days, and one of the first things they've reported is a great reduction in the rat problem. Turns out that when you don't have a lot of food waste in your garbage and garbage cans, the rats lose interest, and I guess they go to the school next door that's not in the composting project. But this is an aside, but sometimes the scale of activity in New York makes some things easier to see. We were sending 3.2 million styrofoam trays a week to the landfills of New York City. That was, we serve about 800,000 lunches, and we had one day off from that, Trayless Tuesdays, when we didn't offer styrofoam trays, and they had their lunches in a boat, a paper boat. So the other 4 days of the week, we were sending styrofoam trays. That's just now coming to an end. So you get the idea. Okay, so while we're on this topic of scale, if you eat 3 meals a day, 365 days a year, and you never miss one, you are responsible for 1,095 meals a year. Boop. And so if you're making these changes that we talked about on behalf of the environment, the local economy, keeping farmers in business, all the things that we're working on, you know, you could make a little difference. If you organize your friends to join you in it, you could make a little more difference. But suppose you were in charge of 7 billion meals a year. Think of the difference you could make to the environment, to the health of the planet, to local economies. And of course, we are in charge of 7 billion meals a year because that's the number of meals that are served in the National School Lunch and Breakfast programs. So if we get control, as you will, of these programs and redirect that procurement towards sustainably raised foods, toward local economic development, we can make a major difference. The power of procurement for sustainability and economic development, as well as health, is a crucial reason why we should do this. Why now? Why am I encouraging you to make a special effort to get involved now? Well, really, it's because of the food movement. And since I've already taken that show of hands, I'll just give, how many people here think of yourselves as part of a food movement, a good food movement, or a food justice movement, or a food sovereignty movement, or am I leaving out a couple of variants on that? Okay, well, the food movement is real. Okay, I was skeptical for a while, and I read with great interest Michael Pollan's piece after the GMO initiative was defeated in California and a couple of soda taxes. And he said, you know, it's all talk until we can develop a little bit of political muscle. But I have to say that I got on a committee to plan a mayoral forum in New York City in which our mayoral candidates would address issues of food policy. And this is one of those things that you do in life. I said, you know, my colleague at the New York City Food Policy Center, where I've been doing a lot of work, didn't want to do it. He has had some disappointing experiences with mayoral forums, so I said, I'll do it. I had no idea what I was getting into. This takes a lot of time and effort and a huge number of conference calls. I hate conference calls, you know, because I can't, like, see who wants to talk next or how people are reacting. Anyway, we did it, and we had the auditorium, which held 400, was completely full, and we had 2 big overflow rooms, so we had 700 people attend the forum live and 1,300 on live streaming. So we had basically 2,000 people. We had all of the candidates but 2, and you may have, I don't know, do you pay any attention to New York City politics up here? I mean, we had 7 of 9 candidates came, and several of them subsequently signed on to policy platforms that we put forward. So I'm thinking the food movement is beginning to find its feet, that we're beginning to communicate with decision makers and power brokers. So the food movement rising is one reason. Food studies programs is another piece of evidence that this is really gaining traction. This is a time when people are interested in food. I'm very excited to hear about the food studies program that's brewing here, and I encourage you to check it out, although you should finish your education degree before you go checking out, but we need good teachers. Okay. And finally, I do want to note that for the time being, we have a champion in, I guess it's the East Wing. Is that where Michelle Obama carries on, in the East Wing? And in the United States Department of Agriculture, a whole raft of people deeply committed to improving the quality of school food and integrating it with the rest of education. So, let's talk a little bit about what teachers can do. Let me just check, because I did make some assumptions about this. How many of you are going to be teachers? Okay, not as large a proportion as I had imagined, but some of the rest of you have friends who are going to be teachers, so you can pass this on to them. So what can you do when you are teachers? Well, the first thing is probably the hardest, because eating with kids makes more difference than almost anything else I've seen. So my advice to you is argue for some other break. It's not the case that I think adults should go all day working with children and never have a break, a time away from them. I just don't think it should be lunchtime. I think we need adults in the lunchroom to keep the place civil, to make it a place where people can enjoy their food. Secondly, not only do I want you to eat with the kids, I want you to eat the official school lunch. That means you're going to have to work to make it good enough to eat. And as I say, they're making big improvements. But if kids see you not eating the school lunch, they make an inference from that. Kids are not dumb. And they say, oh, my teacher doesn't eat that. And some teachers have been overheard bad-mouthing the school lunch. I think they should have to stay after school when they get caught doing that. So that really is destructive. In order to help make the school lunch worth eating, you need to work with parents, kids, the food service department, the administration, the unions. In many schools, there's a school wellness committee, and that is often the best positioned focus to move the agenda. You cannot do it without your food service staff, okay? You can't, you need to start with the food service staff, and you need to listen to the food service staff and find out what would make it possible for them to serve more fresh foods, more whole foods, to institute a salad bar. What do they need in order to do a better job? If you've got a really lousy, an uncaring food service staff person, then after you've tried, you can raise the question of replacing. But what I have found is that all school food service operators have a stake in the level of participation, because that's what affects their budget. Certain fixed costs, like the food service director's salary, the cash register systems, a variety of costs, are amortized over the students who participate. So the more kids you have participating, the easier it is for you to make your budget and eventually have additional resources to invest in better food. So if you can offer your food service director a way in which you might help increase participation, she will typically be ready to be your ally. I think you also need, we all need, to stop taking the food service staff for granted, to stop, in a sense, treating them like the help. I was very moved by a food service worker in Vermont who said to me, well, you know, we don't have legs. And I wasn't quite sure what she meant, and I looked at her a little funny, and she said, you know, we stand behind the steam table, and all they see is this part of us, and we're not real people to the students as they go through. We don't have legs. So I think we need to begin finding those real people. In many cases, in your position as a classroom teacher, you can cooperate with a process that makes the school food better. I particularly like the 5th graders in Burlington, Vermont, who every time a new food was introduced in the cafeteria as a taste test, and the director there is very savvy, and he didn't spend money on a new item without trying it out first on the kids. So every time there was a taste test and, you know, a little dab offered free, the 5th graders did a survey, a formal pencil and paper survey, and calculated the results. So they became the survey team for the introduction of new foods in the school. They learned math and maybe even a little bit of social science research principles, and the school food service director had reliable feedback and didn't have to count empty and full cups. So what can you do now while you're in school studying to be a teacher, as some of you are? I think that school food, is a worthy topic for investigation. I'd like to see all sorts of term papers coming out of these schools. I'd like to see students collecting and evaluating the curricula that exist.
This is humming. So.
Oh, okay, I bumped into it. Okay, this isn't my 3-minute warning.
No. That's still humming.
Well, I could. No, it's okay. I think. Okay, less hum. Okay, okay. So let's move on. Are some of you hoping eventually to be principals or superintendents? Are some of you in, no one's in the academic leadership track? All right, well then I won't preach about what principals and superintendents can do, except to say they are absolutely crucial to this process. Food service can't do it without the cooperation, more than cooperation, the investment of principals and superintendents. Some of the best examples I've seen are elementary school principals who decided to use a little theater to encourage students to eat the healthier foods. There's one in a community outside Philadelphia who dresses up as Salad Man, and he has a green cape, and he swoops around the cafeteria encouraging children to try the salad, eat the salad, and of course they know who it is. But the fiction is, it's a little like, Clark Kent and Superman. The fiction is that somehow or other, Principal Scott has never had a chance to meet Salad Man. They've just never been in the cafeteria at the same time. Food service people all over the country told me that that the respect of the school administration was something that they longed for. In those cases where they had it, it clearly had made a difference to their being able to do their job. In your role as teachers or food activists or parents, all the ways in which sooner or later you will interact with schools, you need to help principals and up the ladder superintendents understand the importance of making the cafeteria a classroom, making the cafeteria a part of the school day, and understand that children learn while they're in the cafeteria. There's a kind of a black box model out there, kind of children check in one end and come out the other end, and the administration doesn't want to know too much about what happens in between. We need to combat that. What happens in the cafeteria is a crucial part of education. What can ed schools do? Since I'm having my opportunity to talk to an ed school, well, I already mentioned including school food in the curriculum, and I have to tell you, I was thrilled to hear that some students had read Free for All in an ed school, because I haven't had the feedback that let me know that was going on, and I'm really excited to hear that. School food should be part of what you study when you're in ed school, and therefore you ought to be encouraged to do some research, to write some term papers, to take up this topic. But the ed school itself may also want to become a resource. The kind of thing that Vermont Feed was doing. It's great that Vermont Feed is doing it in Vermont, but who's doing it in New York? Is there someplace where people can come and build the curriculum that we need to integrate food with our school curriculum? Another thing that all food activists can do is to take a look at the food on your own campus. I'm sure that process has started here, but I bet you're not finished. We should be doing food audits. We should be looking at the disposal of waste. We should be looking about whether, at the extent to which unhealthy foods are available to undermine the healthy foods. And then I think there are others, and I'm hoping that you will tell me during our question and answer period. Finally, I want to turn my attention to what citizens can do. And specifically what I want to talk about is changing the way we pay for school food. For those of you who haven't a chance to read Free for All, you know that it is an argument for universal free school meals. And making a list of what's wrong with the way we do it now, with essentially selling food to children and then saying to some children, well, we sell this food, but you don't have to pay because you're different in some way that makes you not have to pay or not have to pay the full price. I believe that school food should be integrated with the school day and served free to all children. The same way bus transportation is typically provided in most communities, which tends to cost just about what it would cost to do school food. Or textbooks. We used to sell textbooks to kids, but we don't do that anymore because we understand that textbooks are essential to getting an education. So I would like to see school food done on that basis. And I'm going to very quickly list what I think of as the 7 deadly inns of school food. And if there's anybody here, you read Sweet Charity, you know that I must be obsessed with 7 deadly inns, because there they are again. But the first is indignity, that it creates a stigma, that it divides children on the basis of their parents' income. This university and this ed school has a reputation for focusing on inclusion and for a robust and vital commitment to inclusion. And if you are identifying children or setting up a situation in which children know that some children eat free because they're poor, and some children pay a little bit because they're kind of poor, and some children have to pay a full price because they're not poor, you are creating the basis for division and the opposite of inclusion. Secondly, it's profoundly inefficient. I won't go through the whole raft, but you know, the parents have to apply, the applications have to go home, they have to get back, they have to be processed, they have to be certified, the information has to be communicated to the cashier has to distinguish, the results have to, it goes on and on and on. My guess, I'm not a numbersy person, but my guess is it eats up almost all of that 35-cent subsidy for the full-price meals that I mentioned. Thirdly, it's inaccuracy, my third in. It is profoundly error-prone. The studies show that the error rates in school food, in certifying children to the appropriate categories, are astronomical. Even if kids are accurately certified and get into the correct category, it still leaves some kids who are in need out. In that sense, it promotes insecurity, food insecurity, and that's because our federal poverty line is so obsolete, so unrelated to reality. It's now 19-something for a family of 3. You have a family of 3, you could get by on $19,000 a year? No. It is so far from reality that even 185% of poverty may not, which is the cutoff for reduced price meals, may not reach all children who need help in order to be able to purchase the meal. And I heard it again and again in my conversations around the country. Kids who said, well, you know, I didn't qualify for the reduced price and I couldn't afford the free meal. So insecurity, there is an inequity factor because the poverty line is uniform across the nation, but cost of living varies quite dramatically from place to place. And typically, those communities where the cost of living is very low also have lower labor costs, so the uniform federal reimbursement, which they get for their free and reduced price students, goes much further. So actually, meals tend to be better for instance, in the Southeast, because a much larger percentage of the children in any given school district is included under that threshold, and wages are a smaller part of the budget, so more can go for food. So there are inequities, and you here in the Northeast suffer from those inequities particularly. Finally, there's a kind of inappropriateness that is built into a situation where kids are buying foods. They become the consumers, the customers. The food service operation feels it needs to, the word that comes to mind is pander, but pay special attention to their preferences. But these are not some sort of innate biological preferences of children. These are preferences that have been constructed by billions of dollars worth of food advertising. So, so selling food to kids puts kids too much in charge of the menu, I think. And finally, there is a kind of inhospitableness that sets in when schools have to administer this three-tier system. Many schools have tried to reduce the overt identification of free and reduced price children by using a swipe card system where parents of the paying kids, the full price kids, pay by check or put money in an account. And so then we have a situation where the child gets to the cashier and the account is out of money. This can happen because the parent failed to renew it, but it can also happen if the kid has been buying treats in the a la carte line or at the cashier for his friend. So then here's the kid at the cashier with no money in the balance. Many schools will permit children to charge for a day or two, and then they don't permit them to continue. And so in some schools they give them what's called a stigma sandwich. There have been many unfortunate instances of taking the tray away. Okay, so those are the negative sides of our current system, but I do want to go back to this talking about curriculum and about engaging kids with food and about cooking in the classroom, and say that if we had universal free school meals, if schools were a regular part of the school day, we could do so much more of that, because we wouldn't have to be worrying about, well, some kids are not going to have that meal in the cafeteria. I think it's a key to the health agenda as well as the food security agenda. And I think I had better stop there and leave a little time for you to ask questions.
So we'll open it up now if there are a few questions.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Geared towards how do we, as somebody who's worked for Aramark, is knowledgeable about the fact that many educational institutions have a contract with a particular food buyer, such as Aramark or Cisco or whatever this institution may have. How do you work within those contracts to be able to make these changes? Because a lot of times there's pushbacks from the company because they don't want us to pay extra money to like purchase healthier local food, or they don't want to take the time to make an opportunity for locally produced food systems or whatever it may be. So have some strategies for people who are trying to work on these issues to be able to combat the fact that a lot of institutions do have these contracts.
Right. Well, for starters, I think there's no question but what it's a little harder to do with the commercial food service management companies, the Aramarks and the Ciscos and what have you. And I think the power you have is to organize parents, teachers, other components of the school community to write specs into the next contract. The contracts are never open-ended. They're always for a certain number of years. You want to write specs into the next contract for a preference for local food, a proportion of food to be sourced locally, and then you want to get companies to bid, you know, to meet those specifications. So the threat of putting the contract up for bid again can sometimes induce. I do want to say that some of the food service management companies, Chartwell's particularly, and to some extent Cisco Systems, which is more of a distributor than a food service management, have been making serious steps in doing this. They have caught on to the competitive advantage it gives them if they can advertise that their program sources locally. So it's a fast-paced, changing field. One organization that I'd suggest as a resource, if you might be wanting to look into this more, is called School Food Focus. And Focus works primarily with very large urban school districts. So I don't actually think this one would be big enough to, well, it depends. Do you know how many kids you have in school in Syracuse?
21,000.
Right. Their cutoff is about 40,000, but their resources are available to anybody. And so they have sample contracts to use with food service management companies to stress local procurement, healthier practices both for the students and for the environment. Oh, there. Yeah.
So I have two questions that I think tie into one another. In your book, you talk about how the school lunch program is basically
Okay, good. Very good questions. Let me start with the commodities and clarify that commodities are very much how federal participation in school food began. Okay, way back in the 1930s when the surpluses were enormous and there weren't very many ways to, so you're absolutely right there. Now commodities account for at most 20% of what's on any plate or tray. So it's important enough to make a difference to whether the school breaks even or not in its food service, but it's not determinant for the health or quality of the meal. Having said that, after years of discussion in the ether and prodding and what have you, under the current administration, the leadership at what's now called USDA Foods, used to be called the Surplus Commodity Division, it's now called USDA Foods, have made enormous changes in what's offered. So there are lots of low sodium products among the canned goods. There are lower fat meats among the meat products. There is low fat mozzarella if you want to make a, so they are changing there. And it happens that there's a new report out from April 2013 that report is actually specifically about the TFAP communities, the Emergency Food Assistance Program commodities, but it gives you a little bit of update on what's been happening with the school food commodities. So they're better than they used to be and they're going in the right direction. School gardens. I started out as a school garden skeptic, partly because let's just say that my own gardening efforts haven't been abundantly productive. I had a cherry tomato plant, I think I got 3. So it looked harder to me, and I was pretty skeptical. But I have to say I have been introduced to school gardens where clearly tremendous learning was taking place. And some of the learning was when plants didn't produce very much. And teachers, these were teachers who could tolerate failure or the appearance of failure to let the kids explore. Let's take 2 plants and let's put, I don't know, fish meal in one of them. And I'm really not a gardener. I visited a school where each grade level had a garden plot, and the second graders had decided to make theirs a butterfly garden. And so they were doing the research to see what plants would attract butterflies. Now, the school year situation is very different in California, or I just came from Arizona where they're doing fabulous things with school gardens. We're in the Northeast. And I'm not one of those people wanting a year-round school year. I'm still trying to hang on to summers off and a little bit of childhood for people. So I would say greenhouses, and then that's a capital investment that involves money. It's something to which donors are sometimes attractable. It's something that appeals. But I would have a greenhouse part, and I would do the research to see what's going to be functioning in the early fall and the very late spring. Hoop houses in Michigan extended the growing season so that they were getting greens, salad greens, through early December and starting again in February. So that we are making the technological innovations that make this possible. We need the political will and the priority and the willingness to impose and pay taxes that would fund it.
I have a class of architecture and art and design students here, so I was wondering if there was ever an instance through your research where you've seen where design has made a difference in the conversation.
Okay. Definitely in Tucson, where I just was mentioning that they're doing fabulous things, because there they need a greenhouse where they cool the plants. It gets so hot there at part of the year that they have to shade plants and they need to cool them. And architecture students from the University of Arizona were involved in design. We're growing a lot of greens on roofs in Brooklyn, you know, the Brooklyn Grange, the Eagle Street. And again, we needed engineers and architects to figure out how to do that. So I think there's absolutely a role. And then if we ever convert our cafeterias to true kitchen classrooms where kids could, then we'll have to reconfigure the whole inside of the cafeteria and kitchen.
I was just curious, piggybacking on that question about the design in the cafeteria, because I know from the food service perspective up here, you're constantly remodeling the dining halls here. Do you ever remodel a school cafeteria, not unless there's been a capital campaign for something? Those, unfortunately, I think they get set aside until you have to remodel. But
Yeah, it's one of those kind of deferred maintenance things. I mean, I think the location and condition of school cafeterias in the United States pretty much reflects the low priority we have put on school food as part of it. They're typically in the basement, and they're often pretty grim. I think I mentioned in the book that I didn't fully get it. I've lived with it so long, it was so much my own experience. I didn't really see it till I went to Sweden, where the kids eat in dining halls that are light, and they reminded me of dining halls at camp. They had light and plants and high ceilings, and because they believed that part of the day where not only students but faculty ate together, that it was an important source of unity and inclusion as your theme.
So many things to talk about. But so through the evidence you've picked up over the years, which maybe unfounded assumptions might policymakers have, historically or otherwise, about how children relate to their, food landscape within a school, I guess is what we're looking at. That still inform or misguide policy today. You mentioned one of them, which I hope you get at what I'm trying to get at, which is we assume that lunch is not part of the curriculum, right? So you mentioned one of them. What are some other things maybe you've seen, or maybe myths in relation to your work?
Well, when I started this, I started working on this book early in the year, January of 2003. And when I started it, kids won't eat vegetables was just being heard all over the place. And I think that there are a lot of people in Washington who've been too busy with whatever it is they're doing over there, cutting snap or what have you, to wake up to the enormous changes. Kids are eating vegetables. In New York City, we used those stimulus funds, not the ones in the SNAP program, but some that came to the school system, to buy the lowrider salad bars, little salad bars for little kids. And our kids are eating vegetables in the salad bars in New York City. So I think that's been one of the biggest myths. Now, I want to say that certainly for the new staff that came to USDA after Obama was elected, I think they don't share that myth. But I'm sure that there are some of the old line ones that have been there, since Methuselah, who may still share that. But okay, so that's one myth. A second myth is that lunch ladies are dumb. That they have these jobs because they couldn't compete in a niftier labor force or labor market. Lunch ladies come in all sizes and shapes and levels of what have you. There are school food service directors that manage multi-million-dollar budgets and have hundreds of staff people. There are food service directors with PhDs, okay? So when we're talking at the director level, but down at the day-to-day level of the people serving the food, I ran into some wonderful people, and all people who had potential to cooperate and to contribute. Boot camps for culinary boot camps. The Orfila Foundation in, I'm getting my visual aid here, in Santa Barbara, California, had this program of culinary boot camps where they brought in the frontline food service workers from all the schools in Santa Barbara County, gradually over time, and taught them to cook and gave them chef knives and gave them, now they wear the white coats and have pride in their work, and they are producing fabulous food. And these were not people who had been doing that. So cooking is I keep trying to tell my husband, he could learn to cook. Cooking is a learnable skill, and when people are rewarded for preparing good food by having it enjoyed, they want to do it. So that's a second myth. I think there are probably more, and if I think of more, I'll let you know. But let's see if there are any other.
So I think we're coming to close, so if we could just give Dan another piece.
the myth that we can't afford this. Okay. And in my mind, we can't afford not to.
So Jan is going to stick around here and sign books for those of you at $20. So we have books here for purchase. You can come up and talk with her. I also want to thank there are folks here in the audience from the Department of Public Health, Food Studies and Nutrition, also the Department of Geography, who were co-sponsors of the event. And thank you, Jan. And thank all of you for coming.